With a wealth of folklore, Whitby has more than a few ghost stories to share. Like many historical coastal towns, Whitby is associated with more than a few ghostly stories. The small fishing town of Whitby in Yorkshire was the setting for the famous Bram Stoker's Dracula, and its cobbled streets and quaint cottages have helped it become one of the most well-known Gothic towns in the world. While Whitby seems a quiet fishing town by day, at night it has become known for its many ghostly apparitions. Whitby's reputation for things that go bump in the night is further spurred on thanks to the author Bram Stoker and his reference to the town in the popular novel Dracula. However, those who have visited Whitby and walked through the town at night may have had their own spooky encounters. Certainly, there is something rather curious and eerie about traversing the wide cobbled streets late at night, walking past the lit-in windows and listening to the sound of the crashing waves in the distance. After walking up the ascended cliff path, you eventually find yourself at the foot of the Abbey steps. The large ruins standing above you bathed in moonlight, the windows resembling dark charcoal smudges against the starry backdrop. A cold wind whips through the alleyways, causing the signs to creak and swing, and a howl is heard from across the moors. The majestic Whitby Abbey was built in 657 AD, destroyed by the Vikings in 870 AD, and then built up again after the Norman conquest in 1067 AD. There is said to be a few ghosts roaming the grounds of Whitby Abbey, but none of them have a story as harrowing as that of Constance de Beverley. Constance de Beverley was a nun at the Abbey, though the years she was there was unknown. The nun fell in love with a handsome knight. She took a risk and broke her vow of chastity. When the deed was brought to light, poor Constance was brought to justice. She was bricked up, alive, in the dungeon of the Abbey. Her screams of terror went on for days, until she finally died. Visitors have reported the fleeing image of a young woman and the screams and wails of a woman in the Abbey. Not only have people had experiences in the Abbey itself, but also outside. A popular legend, the tale of the Phantom Coach, takes place at the top of the Abbey steps. The story says that if you were to walk up the 199 Whitby Abbey steps on a cold dark night, where even the light of the moon only just illuminates the ground, and stand outside St. Mary's Church, you may be in for a fright. Standing in the grounds of St. Mary's Church, the structure towering above you, like the proud sibling of the Abbey ruins, you might hear the sound of horses approaching in the distance. And if you can further muster the courage to stay, you may see a ghostly horse-drawn carriage charging towards you, with the driver furiously whipping the horses, the sound of the horses' hooves heavily pounding the ground like thunder. As the carriage approaches, the figures are barely visible, and then the carriage hauls up outside the church entrance, horses rearing on their hind legs, and then disappears. To this day, the reason for the apparition's appearances remains something of a mystery, and we can only speculate as to what may have occurred to cause these figures to return. Moving around Whitby, there is a wealth of stories, easily making the Yorkshire coast one of the most haunted places. Being a place near the sea, we can't go far without a story connected to it. The Oyster Man of Whitby. Oysters might now be a delicacy, but they used to be incredibly popular in most towns around the UK. The Oyster Man was a familiar figure wandering the streets offering his oysters to the locals. Whitby's oyster man has a very sorry tale, and can still be heard peddling his oysters on our cobbled streets. Before his death, the oyster man would go from pub to pub shouting, "Oysters alive, ho!" to attract attention for his wares. One night, a group of rowdy men called him into the Golden Lion and began insulting him. The oyster man knew he'd make no sales there and turned to leave, muttering a quiet oath as he went. Unfortunately for him, one of the men heard and couldn't bear to be insulted. He snatched the oyster basket and threw it into the fire. He grabbed the oysterman and threatened to chuck him in the flames as well. The oysterman was terrified. Though he was small, he pulled out his tiny blade he carried for opening oysters and stabbed his captor. To everyone's surprise, the oysterman delivered a killing blow, accidentally striking the man's heart. Though he was not found guilty of his murder in the trial, the oysterman never forgave himself for what he had done. He continued to sell his oysters in Whitby town, always avoiding the Golden Lion. But his cry of "Oysters alive, ho!" was forever changed. His guilt ate at him, and within a year, he died of his own remorse, taking his own life. On quiet nights, make sure you listen out for his ready cry. As you make your way back home, just make sure you don't insult. As you walk the streets of Whitby, you're not going to be truly safe. Don't go down Grape Lane. In the days where Grape Lane was more lovingly known as Grope Lane, due to it being the red light district of Whitby, there stood a bakery where a tragic story happened to the most beautiful of little girls. The young girl was running an errand for her father, whom she loved dearly, taking his dinner to the bakery to heat it up during the summer months. The baker welcomed the young girl. He recognized and allowed her to put the dinner in the oven herself. He had his back turned for only a second when he heard a blood-curdling scream. He was horrified to see that the young girl was engulfed in flames after her hair had been set alight by the oven. Unsure of what to do, the baker beat the flames from the girl, but it was too late. The damage had been done, and the girl died upon arrival to the local infirmary, her skin peeling off as she walked. It had been said that her ghost often appears in front of people on Grape Lane, with flames surrounding her, and you can still smell the scent of burnt hair when she makes an appearance. If you are brave enough to climb the 199 steps to St Mary's Churchyard. Graveyards are extremely eerie places, and St Mary's Churchyard is no exception. Even Dracula spent some time amongst those graves for reasons. Because Whitby was once full of sailors. There came unfortunate times where sailors would die on dry land and would have to have their bodies buried in the earth, rather than a traditional sailor's burial at sea. Widows and families of the lost souls would often find that the graves would be visited on the third night of their burial by the bar guest coach. Witnesses to the haunting side have said that the coach is pulled by headless horses, and the passengers on the coach are the skeletal remains of the sailors, which have come to pay their respects to the deceased seamen. After the soul of the dead sailor is aboard the bar guest coach, the coach sets off again, riding through the graveyard and then driving off into the darkness towards the sea. For a town steeping in Gothic nature and crashing waves, the town has seen its fair share of ghost stories. You can even take ghost tours around the small port town. It's been heavily featured throughout history, and I'm sure it will continue to. Many sightings have been seen of all I have spoken about today. But with it being a popular place to visit, have you ever been? Please let me know in the comments below. Have you had any of the experiences with the many ghosts of Whitby? If you haven't, and are thinking about going, dare you walk along Grape Lane alone at night? Or would you climb the steps to see the coaches? Well, if you do, you don't have to be afraid of what's behind you.